Hey guys, so at the time of recording this video, the ban list has not dropped yet, and I know we're all clamoring to have VFD banned, and I wanted to provide a quantitative reasoning on why VFD needs to be banned, where I went through replays of the top ranked players on Dueling Book playing Virtual World using ygeoscope.com, showing how often they bring out VFD turn 1, how often they win when they resolve VFD's effect, and the overall performance of Virtual World in general. Let me know in the comments if you like specific analysis of decks like this, and I'll try to make more, so make sure to subscribe as well. Now, before we jump into the numbers, this part is really important. I want you guys to quickly know how the numbers were estimated for this analysis. Firstly, to analyze the numbers related to VFD, I only looked at games where the Virtual World player went first. This is because while Virtual World can certainly bring out VFD even when going second, our main concern with this card is just when the opponent goes first and set this boy up. Related to that, I'm also only considering whether the Virtual World player was able to bring out VFD as their turn 1 play. While they may eventually be able to bring out VFD in turn 3 or 5 or whatever, I think it's fair to say that our main concern is when they set up VFD turn 1 or not. Lastly, there's going to be several instances where the opponent just scoops the game after seeing the Virtual World player combo off, and if this was the case and the Virtual World player clearly had enough resources going to VFD, then it was going to count as summoning the VFD and also resolving it. So now we can get to the numbers. Overall, games 1, 2, and 3 combined, the Virtual World player was able to bring out at least one VFD 64% of the time on their turn 1 play when going first. Now this number is actually quite lower than I would have thought, and I'm sure with you as well, but let me explain. For one, Virtual World is known for its tendency to brick, and as I went through the large number of replays, I definitely saw a good share of bricky hands. Another reason is that they can just be hand-trapped and just unable to bring out VFD at times. In extremely rare instances, the Virtual World player may have intentionally not gone into VFD because of the matchup, because the opponent did not care about monster effects for example, but I really didn't see this happen other than maybe one time. Also, the numbers would vary depending on whether this is game 1 or 2 or 3 that are post side, and I'm going to break it down by game as well shortly. Now, of the 64% of the time that VFD was summoned, the Virtual World player was able to resolve its effect on the opponent's turn 93% of the time. What does this mean? So for example, the opponent could have gammaed the VFD and prevent its effect from resolving. Or perhaps on turn 1, the Virtual World player brought out VFD, but it was Nibiru'd on that turn, and they were just not able to bring out another VFD, which is why they wouldn't have been able to resolve its effect on the opponent's turn. All in all, once the Virtual World player managed to summon up VFD on turn 1, it is resolving almost all of the time. And guess what? When it does resolve its effect, the Virtual World player won 97% of the time that game, which is just ridiculous. It really just prevents your opponent from playing at all and is very oppressive, evident by the absurd win percentage. But do you know what's worse than VFD? 2 VFDs. So let's take a quick detour from the flowchart. Now 19% of the time, the Virtual World player was able to bring out 2 VFDs on turn 1. This does not necessarily mean that they have 2 VFDs that actually stick until the end of their turn. They certainly could have, but what I mean by this is that if they bring out VFD the first time, use its effect to bait out Nibiru, and they actually get Nibiru'd, there's instances where the Virtual World player will still have enough resources to bring out a second VFD and pass their turn. So that's still counted as double VFD in my definition. And of course, if they were able to summon 2 VFDs on turn 1, they were of course resolving that effect once their opponent's turn passed around, and when they did, they won 100% of the time that game. So double VFD basically equals death for you. Okay, so now back to the previous flowchart. Now let's say the Virtual World player was not able to bring out VFD on their turn 1. In that instance, they won 49% of the time that game, which is still decent, but certainly not nearly as high. So the lesson is that you have to stop them from bringing out VFD at all costs, whether you hand trap them correctly or they brick, and in both of these instances, you just have to pray that that's enough. Alright, but now you may be wondering that you have to look at the numbers broken down by whether it was game 1 or post side, so let's just do that. If we look at just game 1, so before siding, the Virtual World player brought out at least one VFD 77% of the time. This makes sense since presumably the opponents will not have as many hand traps or specific hand traps like Lancia in the main, at least for the most part, so they're able to bring out VFD more frequently. And if they do summon up VFD turn 1, then they are resolving their effect on the opponent's turn almost 96% of the time. Not quite 100% for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And when they do resolve the effect, they again win at about 97% of the time that game, and it's just an instant win button. Now, if they don't manage to have the hand to bring out VFD turn 1 in game 1, then their win rate is actually pretty low at 35%. So game 1, it is sort of VFD or bust. Okay, so now let's see how the numbers look for games 2 or 3 post-side when the virtual world player went first. They were able to bring out at least one VFD 53% of the time post-side. Definitely much lower than game 1, which again makes sense since opponents are siding in more specific hand traps against them, and possibly the virtual world player also sides some cards as well, which can hinder their consistency. And this really is the ultimate goal when you side against virtual world, to prevent them from making VFD in the first place. But once they do bring up VFD, they are able to resolve the effect on the opponent's turn 91% of the time. While a little lower than in game 1, this is still strikingly high and really concerning. This just shows that if even after siding you were unable to prevent them from making VFD, then there's just not many side cards you can have to stop VFD's effect from resolving once it hits the field. You may have cards like droplets, but unless you have a trap to discard to prevent them from chaining Chuchi, or you have a quick play removal like Cosmic Cyclone, you really don't have a lot of options. I know Xyz Encore is one option, but of all the replays I watched, I literally only saw one replay where the opponent successfully pulled off Xyz Encore, and it's just not a popular side card. And of course, once they resolve VFD on the opponent's turn, they are still winning about 98% of the time that game, so this is a big issue with VFD. You know, even after siding, if you don't draw enough hand traps, which is based on luck by the way, to stop them from making VFD, and let's be honest, sometimes they just have enough gas to plow through hand traps anyways, then you really are a dead fish in the water because there's just not much you can do to stop them after they've successfully brought out VFD and resolved its effect. And post-side, even if the virtual world player did not bring up VFD on turn 1, they still won about 55% of the time that game, which is still pretty decent. Alright, since I had the data anyways, let's finish off by analyzing the performance of Virtual World overall in terms of win percentages based on different factors. Now, as a quick caution, the numbers you see in the next section are based on matches, whereas previously with the VFD analysis, the numbers were based on games. So first off, Virtual World won an overall 77% of the matches in my analysis. When Virtual World players won the die roll, they won about 80% of their matches, whereas when they lost the die roll, they won 75% of their matches. This is actually a really good balance, so going second, Virtual World can still do well and set up their VFD and prevent your opponent from being able to recover. Based on going against different playstyles, they did almost equally well among heavy combo aggro decks, but also control decks like Eldritch and Dogmatica variants and the like. They do really well against beatdown decks because traditionally they are more so going second and deal mass damage kind of decks, and well, it's pretty hard to go second when you cannot activate any effects or even be able to attack because of VFD. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that analysis and the numbers on why VFD clearly needs to get banned. I've been calling for this card's head for a while, well before Virtual World was even a thing, and let's just hope that Konami finally puts this card to rest. That's it for me guys, make sure to subscribe and share this video to your friends if you liked it. Take care.